Have you ever looked in the mirror and asked yourself, what if what I see isn't really me? Get ready, because I'm going to tell you the story of a forgotten road, where the spirit of a child haunted me, revealing secrets that should have remained buried. Can you bear the truth that lurks in the fog of the B4594? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying stories. Let's go. When I thought about taking this trip, I didn't realize that the B4594 road near Hay-on-Wye would become a landmark in my life. I've always been drawn to places with history, especially those that carry an air of mystery and dark legends. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen that night. The B4594 is a narrow, winding road, surrounded by tall, dense trees that seem to whisper forgotten secrets. The leaves swayed gently in the wind, creating a sound that could easily be mistaken for lost voices. The sky was covered in heavy clouds, and the moonlight barely penetrated the darkness, giving the path an almost dreamlike appearance. It was a beautiful place, but there was something unsettling in the air, something that made your skin crawl. As I drove, I couldn't help but think of the stories I'd heard about this road. They say that decades ago, children played in the surrounding forests, disappearing without a trace. Some souls, locals say, never found rest. Oppression and despair seemed to creep in at every turn, as if the road were alive. Watching, drove on, a thick fog began to form, enveloping the car in a shroud of mystery. Visibility became increasingly limited, and for a moment, I had the feeling that the road was guiding me, as if I was being drawn towards something I didn't understand. The radio was playing a soft melody, but the music didn't seem to make sense in that environment. The notes turned into distant echoes, as if they were trying to warn me about something that was about to happen. It was then that I saw her, a small figure by the side of the road, shrouded in mist. My heart raced. It was a child, dressed in old clothes, her hair disheveled by the breeze. What would a child be doing there, alone, on such a dark and cold night? Instinctively, I slowed down, fighting the curiosity and fear in my chest. It's just a mirage, I thought. My mind is probably playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, the reality became undeniable. The child looked straight at me, and his eyes, or rather, what was left of them, were empty and deep, as if there was nothing but darkness there. A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment I stopped completely, not knowing whether to continue or go back. Her image remained etched in my mind, and the road, once quiet, now seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. Fear paralyzed me. What was happening? Why was this child there? I tried to persuade it to move away, but the figure remained, unchanged, as if waiting for something. A feeling of desperation began to take hold of me, and the only thing I could do was speed up and move on, but not without looking in the rearview mirror. The road behind me continued to unfold in darkness, but the image of the child still danced. In my mind, what had I left behind? Some part of me knew that this wouldn't be the last time I'd see her. That night seemed endless. The car glided along the B4594, but my mind was far from the road, stuck on the image of the child. The surrounding trees seemed to lean against each other, as if they shared dark secrets. The thick fog wouldn't go away, and every bend in the road seemed to lead me to an uncertain destination. The atmosphere was charged, as if the air was saturated with the echoes of old stories and forgotten legends. Listening to my heartbeat, I tried to calm down. It was just a hallucination, I repeated to myself, like a mantra, but the feeling that something was wrong persisted, like a weight on my chest. The lights of my car illuminated the road ahead, but the darkness seemed to draw closer, enveloping and threatening. The road continued to stretch, and I couldn't get my mind off it. The image of the child was still fresh in my mind. What could have happened to her? Why was she alone in such a remote place? Curiosity mixed with fear, and I found myself wondering if I should go back and check. Something inside me knew that the road held more than just a simple encounter. It was then that the car's headlights started flashing, a sign that something wasn't right. The tension grew by the second. I looked at the dashboard and realized that the engine temperature was starting to rise. Great, that can't be good, I thought. The last thing I wanted was to get stuck on that road. Especially after what I'd seen, I decided to stop at about a small space by the side of the road, where an old wooden sign indicated a miradoro. The place looked abandoned, with vegetation growing around it and a feeling of abandonment hanging in the air. I got out of the car, and the biting cold of the night enveloped me. The breeze carried a smell of wet earth and something undefined, which sent a shiver down the back of my neck as I stared at the trees, waiting for something to move. A feeling began to grow in me that I wasn't alone. It was as if the bushes themselves had eyes watching my every move. And then, in the darkness, I saw movement. It was the child again, now closer than before. Its empty eyes stared at me, and the expression on its face was a mixture of sadness and despair. "Why are you following me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The answer came in the form of a whisper that seemed to float in the air. "Help me." The sound was soft, but charged with an urgency that cut through my heart. I stood paralyzed, unable to move, as the figure approached. She didn't look threatening, but there was a deep sadness emanating from her, as if her soul was trapped between worlds. "I don't know how to help," I mumbled, not knowing what else to say. The child held out her hand, and a wave of energy traveled through the air between us, as if an invisible connection had formed. My body reacted instinctively, and a protective impulse welled up inside me. "You're lost, aren't you?" I asked, and the confirmation in her eyes seemed almost palpable. Fear and curiosity danced inside me as I tried to understand what was happening. The road, the child, it all seemed like a nightmare, but it was very real. "What happened to you?" I asked, and at that moment I knew I needed to hear her story, even if it meant plunging into an abyss of mystery and pain. She began to speak, her words like a sad song echoing in the breeze. "I can't go home," she said, with a tone that made my heart squeeze. I was joking, and then something happened. Her voice broke, and I realized I was facing a tragedy. "You need to help find my body," she insisted. "I can't rest." The air became heavy, and the reality of what was happening began to set in. It was more than just an apparition. It was a desperate call for help. The road that had once seemed just an ordinary thoroughfare was now turning into a tunnel into the past, where secrets and pain were waiting to be revealed. "I'll help you," I promised, even though I didn't know how I would do it. The child smiled slightly, a glimmer of hope in his empty eyes, but at the same time, a shadow passed quickly across his face, as if something was approaching. The wind picked up, blowing with a force that seemed to want to push me away. The child's figure began to fade, and despair took hold of me. "Wait! Don't go!" But it was too late. She disappeared into the mist, and I was left alone, surrounded by darkness. What had I put myself through? What had really happened on that road? The feeling that something terrible was about to happen enveloped me, and the only thing I could do was get in the car, my heart still racing, and drive on. determined to find out the truth. The car's engine roared as I stepped on the accelerator, but despite the speed, a strange feeling that something was following me continued to haunt me. The image of the child disappearing into the mist was still fresh in my mind, and the promise to help her was becoming more and more of a burden that I didn't know how to carry. What had I pledged to do? The road ahead seemed endless, and the darkness became oppressive, as if it were alive, trying to swallow me up. As I drove, a feeling of being watched began to intensify. It wasn't just the memory of the child, it was as if the road itself was watching my movements. The trees, tall and dark, seemed to lean towards my car, as if to warn me of something that was about to happen. The thick fog thickened, and each bend revealed a new level of anxiety. Suddenly, a movement to my left caught my attention. The figure of the child appeared again, by the side of the road. My heart leapt. I was only a few meters away. She seemed so real, so close. But the expression on her face was one of despair. "Help me," she whispered again, and her voice pierced through the mist like a silent scream. In a flash, I stopped the car abruptly. The door opened with a creak, and I was pulled out by an invisible force. The mist enveloped me, and I felt lost again, as if I were in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, but the child only pointed towards the forest, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I walked hesitantly towards her, each step echoing like a drum in my chest. The darkness of the forest seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the child disappeared between the trees. "Wait!" I was determined to follow her, but the fluidity of the mist made everything confusing. What should have been a simple walk turned into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. As she entered the forest, the silence became deafening. There were no sounds of birds or wind. Everything stood still, as if time had frozen. Then a voice answered, not the child's, but from somewhere deeper inside. "You shouldn't be here." Fear filled my body, and I looked around, searching for the source of the sound. It was a presence, something dark waiting in the shadows. The air became heavy, and the feeling of being watched intensified. It was as if the tree trunks themselves were leaning over me, ready to capture me. The image of the child faded in my mind, but her voice still echoed. "You must understand," she said. "The truth is hidden here." Then a high-pitched laugh cut through the silence, a sound that wasn't human. It was an evil laugh, a feeling that I wasn't alone. I looked around and saw shapes in the shadows, outlines that moved and contorted with a life of their own. Despair began to set in, and the need to escape became urgent. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps, heavy and determined. My survival instinct kicked in, and I ran back towards the road, my heart racing and my legs shaking. The sight of the road illuminated by the car's lights became a beacon of hope. But when I reached the vehicle, I realized that something was very wrong. The doors were locked and the key was inside within reach, but the car seemed protected by an invisible force. The child reappeared in my vision, but now her countenance was distorted, as if her pain was manifesting itself in a physical form. "They won't let you go," she whispered, her gaze pleading for help. "You have to help me before it's too late." A sense of panic came over me, and in a desperate struggle, I started banging on the car windows, trying to attract the attention of anyone who might be passing by. But the road was empty, and the darkness seemed to close in around me like a suffocating blanket. The shadows began to move, and I realized that I was no longer alone. The figures that were once just outlines now became more defined, with faces that reflected pain and despair. "Help us!" A voice sounded, and the mixture of voices echoed in my brain. Despair took over, and the only thing I could do was back away. The feeling that the road was closing in around me. The image of the child continued to haunt me, and the evil laughter grew in intensity. What had I got myself into? The legends about this road weren't just stories, they were warnings. The struggle between wanting to help and the instinct to survive was becoming a macabre dance. And I was in the middle of it, not knowing how to escape. The darkness seemed to intensify, enveloping me in a suffocating embrace. The figure of the child was just in front of me, but its features were now distorted, a mixture of fear and despair. The evil laughter still echoed in my ears, mingling with the whispering voices of the shadows around me. "You can't run away," a voice said, deep and resonant. "Everyone is trapped here." The footsteps I'd heard before were now coming closer, and a wave of dread washed over me. It was no longer just the feeling of being watched. It was as if something was about to reveal itself, a horrifying truth that I wasn't prepared to face. The shadows began to move, and I found myself surrounded by faces that seemed to float in the mist. Expressions of pain, anger, and sadness. They were like echoes of lost souls, crying out for help. "You can't let them take me," the child begged, her voice now more desperate. "I need you to understand. They want you to join us." Her words cut deep, as if a blade had penetrated my heart. Despair turned into a tight knot in my throat. Why was I being pulled into this nightmare? What could I do to help? The evil laughter intensified, and the presence that surrounded me became palpable. The shadows began to solidify, forming grotesque figures that danced around me. Skeletal hands reached out towards me, and I realized that I wasn't just a spectator. I was being called to be part of that horror. The instinct to flee became an uncontrollable impulse. The car was only a few steps away, but it seemed kilometers away. "Run! Go!" the child shouted, and on an impulse, I turned towards the road. Every step I took felt like a struggle against an invisible weight that was trying to pull me back. The shadows howled, and the voices became a deafening chorus, clamoring for attention. "You can't escape the truth," they shouted. "Everyone is condemned to stay here." Finally, I reached the car, and in a desperate act, pushed the door with all my might. The creaking metal and the feeling of being inside the vehicle brought me temporary relief. But the security was illusory. The child was there, standing at the edge of the road, and his gaze now bore a deep sadness. "You don't understand. They need you," she said. And those words echoed in my mind like a distant echo. The sound of something hitting the side of the car made my heart stop. It wasn't just wind or branches. It was as if something was trying to get in. Panic took over again. I accelerated, started the engine, and in a frantic movement pulled away. The road stretched out in front of me, but the feeling that something was closing in on me was undeniable. The rearview mirror reflected only darkness, but I knew I wasn't alone. At that speed, the road became a blur, and the mist seemed to disperse a little. But the feeling that I was being followed only grew. What was that? I thought, trying to rationalize the experience. Fear turned to confusion, and the need to understand what was happening consumed me. The B4594 wasn't just a road, it was a portal to something much deeper and more terrifying. The car's lights illuminated a bend, and as I rounded it, a terrifying sight made me scream. The child was there again, standing in the middle of the road like a stone statue. The car slowed down, and the sight of her made my heart race. "You can't leave me!" She screamed, and the desperation in her voice was palpable. I tried to swerve, but the car seemed stuck in an invisible path. The force pushing me forwards was overwhelming. In a last-ditch effort, I pressed the accelerator, hoping that the car would have enough power to take me away from the nightmare. But the shadows began to close in, and I realized that the road was not only taking me away, but also trapping me in an endless cycle. With a cry of despair, I looked ahead, and the truth began to reveal itself. What I saw wasn't just the B4594 road. It was an entrance to the unknown, a place where time and reality intertwined. The child was the key, and I was about to discover what it really meant to be trapped there. The road became a labyrinth of impressions and echoes, each bend revealing more than just the worn tarmac. The car seemed to float, as if in a dream, caught between reality and something much darker. The figure of the child continued to haunt. My thoughts and the weight of her words nestled in my mind. "They need you." Those words echoed, insistent and desperate. Every second, the feeling of being watched intensified, as if the shadows around me were molding into something else. It was then that I realized that the B4594 wasn't just an ordinary road. It was a portal to the unknown, a limbo where lost souls wandered, waiting for release. The connection between the child and those around her began to weave itself into my perception. I wasn't just witnessing it, I was about to become part of that enigma. Looking through the rearview mirror, something moved in the shadows. It wasn't just the mist, it was faces, the faces of children, of adults, all clamoring for attention, each with their own story of pain and loss. The road didn't just hold memories, it was a graveyard of unrealized hopes. "You need to understand," a voice whispered, the sound echoing like a lament. "We're stuck here, and you're the only hope." The car began to shake, and an invisible force seemed to pull it backwards. "No!" I shouted, gripping the steering wheel with all my might. "I can't stay here!" The child appeared again, now closer, his gaze pleading for understanding. Her eyes, a mixture of innocence and suffering, reflected the truth I was afraid to accept. She wasn't just a victim. She was a spirit seeking liberation, and I was somehow connected to that. On a sudden impulse, I stopped the car and switched off the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Opening the door, a biting cold enveloped me, and the mist seemed to stir with a life of its own. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaky but determined. The child came closer, and the expression on his face began to change, revealing a mixture of hope and despair. "You need to help me find peace," she replied, her voice now crystal clear. "The others will never leave without you doing it. The road demands a sacrifice." Her words were like a blow. The idea that I could be the key to freeing those spirits terrified me. What would I have to sacrifice? My own safety? My life? The mist began to dissipate around me, revealing more figures. Each one had its own story, and with each face that appeared, a new memory formed in my mind. I saw flashes of children playing, laughter echoing, but soon followed by shouts and shadows. That road wasn't just a path, it was a place of tragedy, a trail of souls that never found rest. "You can't run away from your destiny," the child said, and his voice resonated in my heart. "It's your choice, and only you can decide whether to stay or help free those who are trapped here." The weight of his words settled on me, and a part of me knew that I couldn't simply ignore that call. In that instant, I realized that B4594 was testing me. challenging me to face not only the fears that haunted me, but also the truth about what life and death meant. The road ahead of me was not just a choice of direction, but a choice between staying safe or risking everything to help those who couldn't help themselves. With my mind made up, I looked the child in the eye and said firmly, "I will help you. I promise." The shadows around me seemed to stir, and a deep silence settled in. The air was charged with anticipation, and I knew at that moment that the real journey was about to begin. The promise I had made to the child reverberated in my heart, and the atmosphere around me changed. The shadows that had once seemed threatening were now shrouded in an aura of hope. The fog began to dissipate, allowing a glimpse of the silhouettes of other trapped souls waiting for my decision. The B4594 road, once a labyrinth of despair, became a landscape of possibilities. "You need to understand what this means," the child said, his eyes shining with a mixture of determination and fear. "To help me, you'll have to give up something precious. Only then can we find peace." The weight of his words settled in my chest like an anchor. What was I willing to sacrifice? My freedom? My life? The idea was terrifying, but the presence of the souls around me seemed to encourage me. As I looked at those faces, their gazes pleading for release, a sense of deep connection began to emerge. Each of those souls carried pain and sadness, stories of interrupted lives. I could hear their whispers, a symphony of intertwining laments. "Help us," seemed to be their unanimous cry. "How can I help you?" I asked, anxiety mixing with determination. The child's answer was soft, but loaded with meaning. "You must face what you fear most. Only then can we break the cycle that binds us to this place." A shiver ran down my spine. What was I afraid of? Loneliness, death, the memories of a life that had left me traumatized. With each thought, the fog began to stir again, forming images of my past. I began to see flashes of moments that haunted me. Lost friends, broken loves, the pain of rejection. Everything I held in my heart, every fragment of pain, now became a weight I carried. With a deep sigh, I realized that the only way to free those souls was to confront my own fear. "I'm ready," I declared, my voice firm, even though my heart was racing. The child smiled, and the light around us began to shine more brightly. "Then let's go together." The shadows began to move, and a wave of energy washed over me. I was surrounded by those clamoring for liberation, and as I joined them, I felt a visceral connection. The memories of pain began to dissipate as I accepted every part of myself, every mistake and every loss. The weight I was carrying began to transform into a lightness, as if I were loosening the invisible chains that held me back. "Now, make your choice," the child said, and the light around us began to swirl, forming a vortex of hope. Let go of fear and make the sacrifice. Looking at the souls around me, I realized that my life was not just about me, but about everyone I had met along the way. Love, friendship, connection. All of this was more powerful than fear. Gitendo, a cry that echoed in the night. I let the weight of my past dissipate. The light intensified, and a wave of freedom enveloped us all. Souls began to rise, and I felt a wave of warmth and love fill the space. The once oppressive fog now became a soft mist, illuminating the path ahead. The child looked at me, his eyes shining with gratitude. "You did what needed to be done. Now we can leave." With that, the souls began to dissolve into the light, and a feeling of peace invaded my heart. The B4594 was no longer a prison. It was a place of liberation. When the last shadow disappeared, I knew I had faced my fears and found a new purpose. The car, still standing by the side of the road, now seemed a symbol of a journey completed. As I got into the vehicle, a new sense of hope washed over me. The road ahead was clearer than ever, and I knew there was much more ahead. If you've ever wondered what lies beyond death, or whether lost souls really do roam this world, remember, sometimes the real sacrifice isn't leaving something behind, but finding the courage to keep going, even when the path is uncertain. I hope you enjoyed this story. If this story has touched you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences in the comments. Your interaction is fundamental so that we can continue to explore these mysteries together. See you next time.